Hi, everybody. My name is Carl, and I'm a 50 something year old, um, mid to late 50 something year old guy who loves comic books. And one of the things I always wanted to have when I would go to a comic book store was to talk to people about the comic books I had enjoyed. I think I just sort of, my wife goes to a book club. She loves doing that, reading a common book and everything, and sharing that amongst her friends, and usually they do that with wine and cheese. Never been a wine and cheese type of guy, so all I wanted to do really here was to talk about what I liked, why I liked it. I'm not a writer. I'm not an artist. I don't plan on doing this to get into the arts or anything else like that. That's their world. I'm just a fan, just a simple, honestly, just a simple old fan, and I just want to share what I liked about these books with other people. Sometimes I'll have some insights, sometimes I won't. But, it's from one fan to another, and I'll share some of the things that I've gotten here. And like a true book club, I will miss things, and in other things, you may find some stuff there. So, the reason I'm bringing out this is one of five books. It's called the Grand Design. These were all Grand Design series of books, and there were three contributors to these. They were kind of unusual in the fact that they all three of them, it appears to me, were all not just the writer and the artist, but they were also the inker and the letterer on these books. Those four positions, it's very common in a comic book to have. It's usually a very collaborative um, process, because you'll have you might have you'll have a writer, and then you may have an artist. You may even have, before an artist, what we call a plotter, somebody who might draw out some rough sketches of for the artist to take it to. Then you have somebody who, after the artist does the basic layout, um, and sketches out the story. Well, if you've ever seen an original piece of artwork, it's all done in pencils. And then what happens is another person comes right behind them, and they're called an inker. And I'm sorry, there's even a fifth person. I'll get into that in a second. But the inker will go back and they will add weight and thickness to the lines. They'll clean up the work. And so they're literally taking the sketch, and they're adding depth and perception to it through the inking. Not to say that the artist isn't doing some of that, but the inker, is their job is to try and bring out the best that the artist has done. Then on top of that, you depending on the genre, if it's a black and white comic, that you would just have a letterer, and I don't want to say just a letterer, because a letterer is an art form in itself. Besides making the text legible, they have to help with the flow of the story. Some people are very creative as far as what they've done and innovative in their lettering, but at the end of the day, this is a combination of not just of images and words in a series that brings the reader through a story. And on top of that, um, you can have a colorist, and a colorist will go back in and work on the shading. And most of these guys, depending on who they are, they usually don't work in a silo, meaning the artist might have some input as far as what colors they want these images to look like, what the final rendition would look like. So usually the artist has a vision, and it's the other people besides the writer, who in most cases has the final image of the book, are following the direction. So, because there are multiple chiefs involved in this, it's one of the interesting things. It's a microcosm of how people work. So, what do I mean by that? You've had some great collaborations. Let's take it outside of comic books for a second. Jerry Lewis, Dean Martin, back in the late 40s, early 50s, these guys were the rock stars. They were, the hottest group in the world. You just couldn't, they were producing hit movie after hit movie. Dean Martin was a heartthrob. Jerry Lewis, was basically Jim Carrey, Steve Martin, Robin Williams, all wrapped up in one. They did some brilliant stuff. If you ever get a chance to watch some of their early TV stuff, it's the precursor of Saturday Night Live and really good skit comedy that came through. And it was very brilliant and very innovative. Um, but after a point of time, you know, of a very successful partnership, it had to dissolve. It went south. They didn't talk to each other for a long period of time, and that went, and that's unfortunate. Another great partnership, and it's not the only one, but I'm going to use one of the most popular ones in the last half century. It's the Beatles. So the Beatles, for 10 years, and created number one hit after number one hit, an incredible sound that they kept on developing and reiterating without, and they were really good at what they did. But at a point, they had to go their separate ways. The collaborations may have been bigger than the individuals themselves, and the individuals needed a space to get out of it. Talking about now back into our industry, into this industry or into this medium of comics, probably one of the greatest runs that was a collaboration. And personally, since I'm in the superhero genre, that's where my love is. Would be Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, and it might be Jack Kirby and Stan Lee, but Stan would love to have his picture on the top of every comic book, at the end of the day. They're running the Fantastic Four. They took a comic book company that was on the brink of bankruptcy. Where the ideas came from and who had the original impetus and who took what where. At the end of the day, Stan decided to do a book. It looked a lot like some of Jack's earlier work, Challenger of the Unknown, which was a good title, but was never going to be what they put together, which was the Fantastic Four. And, they had one of the longest runs. I think it was 105, 106 issues. There's a question of how many issues Stan was contributing after issue 50 or so. And or Jack apparently, through this collaboration, and definitely in the first 55, 56 issues or so, they put together the genesis of almost all Marvel of the Marvel universe in those beginning issues, from the Negative Zone to the Watcher to Galactus to the Silver Surfer, Skrulls, the Doctor Doom, Namor, Black Panther, and I'm not even giving it a full listing here, but and then on top of that, oh yeah, Adam Warlock, which unfortunately Jack Kirby did not like how Stan Lee handled that creation, as rumor has it, and I wasn't there. But what we do see is afterwards he didn't put another new creation in after the fact. But there was a genius that Jack Kirby had, and Stan Lee's genius, as far as I see it, as an outside observer when he participated, was he was able to keep Jack, from straying too far outside the lines. Because one of the dangers that most artists face is they need a good editor, and you see that in some people's early works when they have constraints. It doesn't really hamper the artist. It really helps challenge the artist and forces them to be extremely creative. Now, I'm sure people can disagree and agree to disagree, and that's okay. But let's talk about another collaboration here. This is the Grand Design series. That's how I'm going to rate it. I don't know if there were any other Grand Designs. I've looked for more, but I've seen these three guys who were on podcasts together, and I know they knew each other. One has just passed away, and unfortunately, their passing is quite controversial and unfortunate. And I'm not going to talk anything about that. There's plenty of people out there for this, but we have the Fantastic Four. We have, on top of that, we have the Incredible Hulk Grand Design, which was done by a man named Jim Rugg, and then the one that I believe kicks it all off, and he did 3 grand designs, was the X-Men Grand Designs. So publishing wise, this looks like it came first. Now, I'm not completely ready. I wasn't there when they came out originally. I wasn't really buying or collecting comic books at that time. But this one caught my eye because I'm a Fantastic Four fan, and this is, I love everything Fantastic Four. X-Men has had an incredibly good run, and they built their series out well. The Hulk is important if you're reading comics. And there's some runs that I've really enjoyed of the Hulk, but overall, I'm not. To be honest with you, I'm not the biggest Hulk fan. But Hulk always sells. Hulk has been very popular. It didn't always get its own run, but there have been good. Look, it's the Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde story. So what happened was that these two gentlemen, and how I was introduced to Grand Design, or what got me into Grand Design, was that these two gentlemen were doing a YouTube channel called Comicbook Kayfabe. And what they were putting out, what I liked about them, they were obviously they're artists, but they were comic book fans. I'm going to talk about them as far as how I know them, which is very limited through Comic Book Kayfabe. So what they did there through that series is that they would show comic books that fans would love and why they would love them. And then they would go into some of what it took to make these comic books great. Now, I'm not, I don't, I can't even imagine how to accomplish all this. They did give a little bit of like the history behind it and the line work and all the other magic here. But what I look at the end of the day is the finished product. And I think all of these are love letters to comic books in general. At the end of Ed's life, him and Jim broke up for unfortunate events that have surrounded. And if you want to look in the news, there's plenty of stuff there. But before that, what an incredible collaboration that these two were doing as far as sharing their love of comic books and everything else. Tom Scally had kind of been on his own. He would show up on their show every once in a while. And obviously he has some connections because I believe Ed started the series first, and then Tom came in. So I don't know if they were working on this at the same time. I don't know whether Marvel had decided to commission these books. I don't have any of that knowledge. I'm just really grateful that this work is here, and I'm going to express some of the reasons why I like it, and we'll go from there. So the grand design, the genius behind these books in the series is, first of all, these are known. If you look up here in the corner, you might be able to see it. It says Marvel Collector's Special or Marvel Collect. They call them Treasury Editions. And for those people who grew up, were kids of the 70s, you had your regular size comic books, and then you had these Treasury issues. And they were actually, I think, about twice. They were a little bit bigger. And they would reprint a book that had sold well, that had a big fan film. They might, put 3 or 4 of them together. And instead of selling them for 25 cents a piece or 35 cents, they sell for $1.50. And, as a 10-year-old reading these things, it took all my attention. It would suck me into their little worlds. So they've taken some of that love and put it in here. And I don't know if this is going to show up very well. Let me see if I can get the light to catch it. You might catch a little bit here, is we've got the Fantastic Four, and they've, it's a nice little deconstruction on the bottom. There we go. You can actually see here that the Invisible Woman, they've done a little bit of a sheen or like some type of plastic, and when the light catches it right, you see her outline. So you get to see these guys brought back. They're distilled. So what you're seeing here with the communication of the form is that this is going to break down quite a bit of the history of the Fantastic Four and everything that's going on in basically about maybe 100 and something pages or so. Not a super thick read, but at some point it's going to be very dense. Going through this book had not been an easy part. I'm starting with this book first because I'm just this is the one that I bought first. This is the one that made me love the series. It may not be the best of them, but it's real. I enjoyed it. And this is kind of I don't know, this reminds me of Walt Simmons or Simonson's artwork when he did the run. And I like this. But when you first digest this and what's going on here, what they're doing is they're really running a canonical story of the Fantastic Four, which when it was originally published could not be ever run, because the way that the story, when you look at this, going back to the history of comics, what made Marvel great was they really started, and Stan did understand that you needed to start serializing these stories like soap operas. And so these stories had to come back in, and readers
if they missed an issue, they missed a part of the story. And this was really a new thing. I mean, the first few issues of Fantastic Four, they're they're doing like a page to a half a page of their origins because they know that they're getting new readers coming in. Now, this book had gone and started selling out. It was the book that saved Marvel Comics. Stanley was looking to get another job. This was an industry that got no respect at all. I mean, he didn't want to admit what he did for a living. Even though he was making a good living, he felt like it wasn't highbrow enough. And so, that was what was going on there. So, getting back into this, writers go in and you get new teams coming in and out. They had a long run on Fantastic Four because of how important the book it was. But you get new writers in, you take these characters and you have them crossing into other comic books all of a sudden. And this had already been started to be worked on with DC with their Justice League of America, and that was the other part of what goes in here. I forget the two people there, but Stan Lee's uncle, who owned Marvel Comics, which was Timely Comics, was talking to the owner of DC at a golf course. Said, "Boy, my Justice League of America is selling really well." And he came back to Stan and he said, "Hey, we should do something like that." And then Stan's wife said, "Why don't you do what you want to do?" And so he went ahead and grabbed this. And this really has the framework in the beginnings of the Challengers of the Unknown. But what they did here with the Geniuses is you have an accident that creates these four characters. But on top of that, there are other stories that have come up with over the years. And you figure that, the Fantastic Four have been around for 60 plus years. And just to put it all in perspective, 60 plus years, wow. And there have been artists who have written stories that predate the origin that still affect the Fantastic Four. And what do I mean by that? Well, let's first go into the splash page. So here, here's Tom Scally, and he's come in and he, instead of creating the infamous cover that one of the most famous covers in a comic book that's out there, of these four characters dealing with a mole monster, he takes a frame that's inside of issue number 1, an incredibly great frame that never was there. And he basically, it's the four hands coming together. Now, when the original frame is done, they're not in costume. They're basically flesh colored, except for the thing that's got, who's made in rock. And this is probably the most accurate to the original one because his suit is tattered because it's just changed. And, but they do put in here, "Ain't been no more I am what Sue called me, the Thing." So that is really one of the core parts of the story and the origin. It always ends, or it always had ended, when the Fantastic Four decided to join and together that they were going to become a bigger unit. It was what Ben named himself. So, but what they start off with page 2 of this story, as we get into here, is the Fantastic Four. We get into the Watcher, who doesn't show up canonically in the comics until issue 40s. Oh, I forgot the Inhumans were introduced in the Fantastic Four, but we're going to see a little bit here, and we're going to see Galactus. Now, Galactus shows up in the Silver Surfer, I believe, shows up 4950, and then Galactus shows up, and don't hold me to those numbers. But the series starts, I believe, either 49 through 51 or 50 through 52. It's a 3-issue series. It's called the Galactus Trilogy. It's one of the first major crossovers that ever happens. But in the beginning episode, Tom said, "To heck with that. I'm just going to start to talk about Galactus because he's got such a big part of the FF story." And we're going to talk about the Eternals. The Eternals is a story that's written after Jack has his falling out with Stan, leaves Marvel Comics, goes to DC Comics, creates one of the really a seminal masterpiece called The Fourth World, which includes the New Gods and Mr. Miracle and the Forever People and the Adventures of Jimmy Olsen. But they grabbed something and then he comes back in the mid-70s and he creates this other bonkers story called The Eternals. And in a way, it's good and bad. Now, Galactus's origins don't even get told in the Fantastic Four; they get told in Thor, and that are later in this series. So, but what Tom Scally has done is he's pulled out these things and he's trying to put them in correct order. So there really is an intelligence that's going on here of like, okay, well, writers started to bolt on different characters as the story continued, because you can't write a story that's going on 60 plus issues without having side characters, additional people touching this. That's why there was so much character creation being done in Marvel, was because, just talking about four people in a room, stories are going to get boring after a while. So, you get Captain America a little bit. You can start to get the stories. If you start to look at the squares, they're really dense and small and tiny. And that's why I said, in some ways, it's a love letter to have drawn this. Obviously, a labor of love to draw it, colored it, lettered it, inked it, everything. It's also a love letter to read it. In some ways, it's not the easiest thing to read, because he's trying to put in so much information. There's a Black Panther, but all of a sudden, boom, we're starting to, he starts to break these characters out, and there's a little bit of the action that starts to go in here. This is not really, these books are not really action reads that you would normally get in comics. And so that's part of the difference. But this really starts to create a historical episodes of what's going on with these lives, how many different things were affected. And, it does give you a little bit of the wham boom that I love in comic books, the splash page, a little bit, we got a rocket ship going off and everything else. The classic thing, and this is what they look like when they come out of the spaceship. And, but it's really going in there. Now, I'd say the first 10% goes into the first issue here. This is how Tom Scally broke it out. And then he starts to quickly speed through this and bring in all the sub characters that are needed to be in here. Now, Namor was created in the 30s. He's one of the oldest comic book heroes, but he was reintroduced into the Fantastic Four. You start to get the Impossible Man, the Hulk, and the Thing classic battles. So by the time you're getting Impossible Man and the Hulk, you're already into the issues 30s that are coming in here. I mean, the Hulk and the Thing, I think, was issue 13 or 14 or so, but you're starting to get a lot of the different stuff here that's going on. And so it's not in the order of where the comic books were written, but it was more in the order of how the stories were told. And we can go over some of this now. And then I'm just going to show you a couple pages. Jim Rudd goes kind of the opposite way. I mean, you look at this page, it's all image. It's the one-page splash scene, which is okay because the Hulk is a monster. And here you've got, basically this is, the Hulk from the original run. I think that's Jack Kirby's design. I have to take a look at that. But you do have some Kirby reprints coming in here. But then you get some panels that are clearly his own work. Now you start to look, here's Jim Rudd working some of the more famous images under, he's rewriting some of the more famous splash pages. This is, what's his face? The creator of Spawn, Todd McFarlane. Before he did Spawn or Spider-Man, he had a run on the Hulk. And this is one of the greatest splash pages of Wolverine fighting the Hulk there with the Hulk's reflection in the claws. To read that, I remember reading that in college, and I just was blown away. But here you go, completely the opposite in size. I mean, this is frenetic. It is following the pages to a degree. He does cut it down a little bit and edit down the stories. But he is bringing in more of the action and the boom. He is, we're definitely getting fights. We're definitely getting a lot of the thinking that goes on here, the classic pages. And this could have honestly, when you look at the structure of it, could have been just any regular comic book in a lot of ways. It doesn't have the same historical reference guides that you're seeing that Tom Scally had done. But you are seeing a lot of, he's bringing in like a, when you have a rerun series, or a MASH used to do this where they do a clip series. And that's kind of what he's doing in here. He's putting together a clip. He's giving you a little bit more of a bang here. Now, this is the last of the series the last of the publications that was done. I don't think Ed Piskor was working on any others. So I don't know if Jim or Tom will be doing another here, but these were really good. And he grabs in here. This is John Byrne's cover that he brought in here, and it's really nice to see a combination between the two. Last but certainly not least, this is the OG, as he would be called, original gangster. This is Ed Piskor. Ed Piskor, what I love about this, and it's just a love letter to Marvel, to comic books and collecting. Um, he takes the paper. Um, Real quickly, comic book paper is a derivative of the pulp magazines. And the pulp magazines, why they call them pulp magazines or pulp fiction, is because pulp paper was a byproduct of when they of that was coming out of the sawmills. So they were looking for something to do with all this cheap paper, and so the first things they just started to do was create dime novels. And because of the way printing presses would run, they really couldn't afford to shut them down. So they needed to continually feed them, because to change them and do when they shut them down was expensive. So it was better to write something on really cruddy paper and sell it for a really inexpensive, and it was a byproduct. It was, it didn't they didn't care if it made a if they really didn't care in a lot of cases whether it made money or not, um, because simply they just needed to keep the printing presses running, and they had a throwaway product that they were looking for. So the pulp, the pulp fiction novels are the precursors to the comic books. You've got the Long Ranger, you've got Tarzan, John Carter of Mars, the Green Hornet, the Shadow. These are all coming through these dime novels, and from that, then they start to create comic books. Comic books in themselves really come from the funny papers, and I forget who it was that decided, hey, let's start reprinting the funny papers. And then after a while, they said, hey, we ran out of, they would just collect all the funny papers. They print out a book, and they found that those paid more than they were making a lot of money on it. People were buying that, so then they ran out of, they weren't getting enough funny paper, so they had to contract the artists to fill the pages. So what would happen is, because it was written on such low quality paper, after a year or so, all these comics would yellow unless you have them in these hermetically sealed boxes, or these new special grading containers. They were all going to yellow on you. So what he did here, and what I love about this is, he's like looking at this like, hey, this isn't a collector's item. This is something you should read. And that's kind of what I feel about most of these comics. Sometimes, we take our comics and our toys and we put them in hermetically sealed boxes, and we really rob the joy out of everything. So what we get here is, his X-Men. And one of the things I love here on the inside, he's taken what you'd normally see on the bottom of a comic book, the subscription stuff and all of that, and he puts it right there, right down to the phone number of Marvel Comics. And we'll go into this a little deeper. I've been talking for quite a while, and I don't even know how anybody might follow, but he's got in here, one of the things I love about it is to really show energy. He's decided to use white ink around the objects to really make them pop. And so this is, normally you'd be like looking at white paper, but they didn't have white paper. It was going to yellow. So he used white ink to make these images there, and talk about a control of the color. Because he knew what paper it was going to be printed on, and how it had to be colored. It really does affect the mood and the timbre of the whole thing. And not as small a page as what Tom Scally was doing. A little easier to read. He brings back in the Watcher. He brings in the Recorder, who's another character I believe he's created in Thor magazine. I love how the fact that he creates these split personalities, or these splits, universes here, and he's basically saying, I hope you enjoy this love letter. And it really is. You can see that these 3 issues are truly a love letter. And what I love, you're starting to read this, and boom, your eye goes here. Boom, your eye goes here. And it's fun. It's not as cerebral, but it's not as phonetic as what Jim Rugg did. Or as, I feel like we're still going into a lot of depth of story here, and the characters. And maybe it makes more sense for Jim Rugg that it was, the Hulk is a monster. He just rambles through and creates a massive destruction. And we don't get as many deep stories as we would get with these other characters and these interrelationships. But it's really nice. This was, I believe, printed before the Fantastic Four, but I'm more of a Fantastic Four head than I am than I am an X-Men fan. Even though I do love the X-Men, I got to tell you, Ben Grimm and the Fantastic Four there. But he prints out 3 stories. Amazing finishes, amazing, story arcs. He goes again with a split page on each one of them. He brings them in. He's very episodic here. And what he's doing is he's condensing. So this was originally the original run before the New Mutants. Now he brings in the New Mutants in his second series, and then in the third series, and this goes right through the Dark Phoenix, and really where we see most of the popularity that soared. And really, this is really where Claremont and Jim Byrne and Terry Austin really shined. It was one of the most amazingly produced things that came out. It was really amazing. That, and around the same time, maybe Teen Titans with Marv Wolfman and Jim Perez. But then we get Grand Design, which is what makes the X-Men really truly great. In this last one, is they have such a strong seminal stories. And one of the problems with Fantastic Four, and they've had good writers on it, you can't, their earliest work, with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, hasn't really truly ever been matched. John Byrne did do a run with Fantastic Four, which is really quite good. I'm going to give that to him. Jonathan Hickman had just done an amazing run that I really enjoyed. But the number one, still the top record of all time is going to be 1 through 100 and something. And that's what's always going to be there, as far as the Fantastic Four. So once you get through the first 100 issues or so, the rest of the stuff is nice, but it's not as great as the original stuff. And they've had great writers on it. It's really a testament to how magical that collaboration was. And so, but here what we've got is we get other people who've taken it up. Chris Claremont does write the series for quite a while. And he has his hand into the extinction. He's no longer writing the book, but it really speaks to how, the creation of this, the really taking a throwaway character like Wolverine and making him into something quite amazing. And this is where something kind of unique about the X-Men is, when you look at the beginning of X-Men, the first run of X-Men, which I also feel, I think goes up to 100-something issues with the original team, they canceled the book. It wasn't strong enough. So there were good stories, and there were great stories, and they were important, but they canceled. They couldn't get readership involved in this at that time, and it takes another talent, and in this case, it really is Claremont who comes on in the beginning, and I think it's Len Wein who writes it with him, and if it's not, I apologize. Who's the artist? I'd have to look that up, but then he leaves shortly afterwards, and then within a short period of time, you've got John Byrne and Terry Austin coming together, and they run for about 20 issues of some of the most incredible eye candy comic book that you've ever read. I mean, and the line work and everything else is just amazing, and the story is compelling. But then they leave. The artist and the inker go on to other things. The collaboration was short term, but because Claremont, and I'm going to give it to Claremont because he continues on with the story, and it still continues to be as successful. He gets other collaborators in there, and he's able to continue with the story all the way through to a really satisfying story end. There have been other people who've come in after the fact. Josh Whedon, who's done a run, Jim Lee. You've gotten some really good folks out there, but at the end of the day, sometimes it's really the first people who really do a great job with it, or who had a good vision. So this is my little time of why I like it. I have no conclusions to this. It's an incredible run of 5 issues. Will it stay in print? That's one of the questions I have, because of the issues with Ed Piskor, I couldn't find this in publication. I had to get this, and he's only passed about a week and a half ago. I had to buy this not from Marvel, but from a second source. I paid a little extra money. I paid I think I paid under $20 for each of these original books. And this one I paid a little over $30 for. Not an incredible bump, but because of everything, I don't think they're going to be around much longer, because the work has gotten tainted, unfortunately. And that's unfortunate. That happens, and things fall in and out of favor at times, and it may always be out of favor. But if you're a fan, you're an older person, you've read a lot of this stuff, and you've really consumed it. This series is amazing. I really hope that Tom Scally or Jim take up the mantle, put out another piece. Maybe do Avengers Grand Design or Daredevil Grand Design. Those would be interesting runs to do. I'm sure that Defenders. There's probably a few of them that are there that would be kind of cool, kind of fun to do and see. Spider-Man Grand Design. Um, you know, but this relationship, like the Beatles, like Stan and Jack, like Jerry and Dean, it ran its course and it created an immense body of work, which is what we're celebrating today. And I'm grateful for these guys to put their time down, to put their energies into this, and it gives me a lot of delight and joy to read these. And if you haven't, take a look. Take care.